Viewers of this lovely planet Earth, the third planet from the solar system, welcome to Real Turkey channel. You know me, Attila Big Daddy Yeşiladem. As the name suggests, this channel is about Turkey, but today's subject is not necessarily about Turkey. It's about the clash of civilizations in a different context and how it reformats the world economy. And I would like to say a few words about why Real Turkey sometimes covers subjects like emerging markets and US politics, etc., etc. I have been analyzing and covering Turkish political and economic affairs as well as the markets for 31 years now. Up until Erdogan coming to power, which is roughly 20 years ago, Turkey was peripheral to world events. We're at the margin of the world, very parochial country. We didn't really have much interest in the world affairs or weren't really integrated into the global marketplace. To give the man credit, Mr. Erdogan changed this all. Turkey now has broad trading interests with Middle East, North Africa, even sub-Saharan countries, and of course with EU. And we are a critical or crucial player in Middle East politics, in Caucasus, and of course in the Eastern Mediterranean, for good or bad. And of course, globalization has accelerated so much so that I wouldn't say Turkey is at the center of the world, but we're much closer to the center than 20 years ago when I was still cutting my teeth in this business. This means that nowadays, when I try to understand Turkey, I must cover a wide variety of subjects, the roots of which are not necessarily in Turkey, but in the United States, in China, in global supply chains, in energy markets, etc., etc. And this video about the clash of civilizations and how it reformats the world economy is such an event. It started with me thinking about how the new struggle between Russia and the United States will play out for Turkey. Then I realized Russia and Iran have already allied with China, and China is in the middle of a clash of civilizations with the United States. So I decided to talk about clash of civilizations, which is a subject on which one can write several books, as Samuel Huntington did. But I'm going to limit myself to its potential economic impacts. A few points need to be made. First of all, the dispute between US and China is not about trade, and it's not just between China and the United States. As I've said, China has already struck an alliance between Iran and Russia. United States has on its side Canada, Australia, India, and Japan, though in a timid way, and most of the European countries. Turkey is between two blocs, which is, of course, a problem. Two, Samuel Huntington used the concept of clash of civilizations as it pertains to the Islamic civilization and what we call the Western civilization or the Judeo-Christian civilization. I am going to apply this concept to the great power contest. Obviously, you may remember the last great power contest between the Soviet Empire and the Western Bloc, which United States and the Western Bloc won by default. That's without a war. United States, USSR just collapsed. There, of course, in addition to economic and military interests, what drew the conflict was the communist ideals and the system and the Western ideal of liberal democracy. When it comes to the problem between China and the United States, or between the competing camps, it is also a clash of civilizations in the sense that at the root of the dispute are values. The Chinese believe that they are the most civilized people in the world, that their system of state centric development and organic bond between the citizen and the state is much better than the decadent, corrupt, and self centered Western democracy. Again, I'm not prejudiced towards either, although I do prefer democracy. I'm not saying that this is the only thing that drives the conflict. Obviously, China has been underdog for hundreds of years since the heroin wars, uh, as far as I'm concerned, and they want to get their fair share uh, because of their increasing economic might. Already, they have essentially invaded Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is not an independent territory anymore, and they set their eyes on Taiwan, and they're trying to expand their territorial sovereignty over the South China Sea. Russia is doing the same thing. Russia lost most of the Soviet Empire after the collapse, and now Putin is trying to put the pieces back together. And of course, finally, there is the economic aspect. China believes that by imposing unilateral and self-serving rules, United States and EU even are all they are trying to do is to stifle uh, China's development and Chinese rise to supremacy in terms of economic matters. Whereas the West thinks China is violating the rules of international trade, using slave labor uh, and essentially stealing technology or confiscating technology from Western companies to gain an unfair advantage over the West. So there is going to be another great power contest between the China camp and the United States camp. This is going to be a very long war. Now, remember, the Cold War lasted from 1947 till 1990. This one will be quicker. In my view, it will last about 10 years, and it won't be fought on any battlefield. I don't think any bullets will be fired. It will be fought in the virtual world and in very remote places like the space and some minefields where rare earths are dug out. We won't see most of the war happening. It won't be in the evening news. Before we get to the economic aspect of this multifaceted war, let me say a few words about how fast the world was changing before this COVID 19 pandemic struck us. Obviously, there were three trends, which sort of like, cliche words, boilerplate words that you have all heard: Industry 4.0, artificial intelligence, and Internet of Objects. All of these things are now coming faster to the factory or the workplace because COVID 19 made labor very expensive in the sense that if one worker or employee gets sick, you have to shut down the entire workplace and pay for their health costs. So you know all in all costs, labor is much more expensive, which means you have to rely more on you know artificial intelligence, bring more robots to the factory floor, even use robots in service industries. And finally, of course, if people are going to work from remote locations, the Internet of Objects is going to be extremely meaningful in terms of manipulating machinery uh, and objects from far away. So these things are already changing the world, and when they're juxtaposed over the clash of civilizations, we're going to see a massive impact on, on the world economy. This is why I use the word reformatting. Nothing will ever be the same. But let's focus on the world economy. The first item here is going to sound rather fantastic to you or science fiction, but it is true. This is the best picture I could find. But weaponization of space is one of the first victims of the great powers contest. And let me explain why. There is something called a doctrine, a military doctrine called mutually assured nuclear destruction. That means in a war, the combatants have sufficient nuclear warheads which they can activate at any moment to completely annihilate the other side. And the other side will do the same in return. Therefore, there is really no advantage to stage a nuclear war. During the Cold War, both Russia and the United States tried to invent different platforms to load their nuclear warheads on to avoid this dilemma. What really sunk the Soviet Empire is the last stage of the arms race, initiated by former President Reagan, which people at that time laughed as Star Wars, which was fantasy by then. But Mr. Reagan spent so much on, developing space weapons and armaments at large that USSR went bankrupt. I don't expect China to go bankrupt, but if you can weaponize satellites or launch habitats or platforms that carry nuclear warheads or other state-of-the-art weapons into the space, you have an advantage over your rival. For instance, electromagnetic pulse weapons. Anyhow, let me assure you that there will be another arms race. Both sides will invest huge amounts of money into their military budgets, which is, of course, going to be devastating for the civilian economy. Remember the plows versus swords debate or argument in your economics books. Resources are limited, wants are unlimited. Every penny you spend on a tank is a penny you don't spend on the education of a poor child or on building another healthcare facility. Another aspect, the examples of which we're seeing right now, is hoarding of strategic minerals and materials. China is hoarding electronic chips, computer chips, because they are deficient in terms of production. And this is why the American side suspects they may eventually try to invade Taiwan, which is one of the major manufacturing centers of electronic chips. If this is true, then China will also exert extreme political and military pressure on Japan and South Korea, which are also major production centers. An area where there is very little familiarity is minerals called rare earths. I don't, on the chemical table, elements table, I don't even know where these things stand. But they can only be found in a few countries. They are extremely hazardous to dig out, for reasons I don't completely understand, but they're poisonous, I suppose. China and United States both have large mineral deposits, but as I've said, United States is more conscious about human life than China. So these go into anything from smartphones to war machinery, etc., etc. And Africa has an abundance, I believe. So the proxy wars in Africa will accelerate, but the thing is their prices will soar, and it would be increasingly difficult for poorer countries like Turkey to access these minerals to develop homegrown high technology industries. A more more immediate and visible problem is that technology trade will be severely limited. This is what United States is already doing to Huawei and other company, TikTok. I can't pronounce their names, but essentially, United States is trying to reduce China's competitive advantage in high-tech companies by shutting them off the American market so they can't make enough profits, which they plow back into new investments or R&D. And it's also coercing or convincing its partners to do the same. Believe me, soon it will be Turkey's turn. Essentially, every critical country, in terms of being a market or being geographically in a critical position, will be forced to take sides and take either Western technology or China technology. Also, eventually, we may see United States telling Apple and Nike or Microsoft that they can't produce components in China because that's against national interest. Certainly, existent laws gives Mr. President Biden the power to do so. I mean, they're not going to come back to the United States, but they may have to relocate to friendlier nations like India, Pakistan, and Vietnam. But today we talk about supply chains a lot. And usually, when you say supply chain, people imagine, a shipping lane or, a railroad. But these are not the only supply chains. The most important supply chain is the internet. That's where we supply information to other countries or to our counterparts in a business deal. And I'm afraid there will be two internets, one for China, Russia, and Iran and their allies, and one for the West. There's another reason for that. Both sides are accusing the other party for disseminating false news or fake news. If you live in the West, Biden is accusing Russia of intervening in the American election campaign. Many Europeans are making the same claim. Macron accuses Turkey of planning to intervene in the French election campaign. And this is a perfect pretext, or maybe the truth, to essentially keep China out of the American internet. And the Chinese are worried, or the Russians are worried, that under the pretext of freedom of speech, Americans are spreading malicious lies and dangerous ideas among their population. So if we have an iron curtain in the internet that splices in the middle, humanity would be robbed of its probably greatest inventions of the most recent times. And I think the world population would be much worse off because of it. Of course, the traditional non-military weaponry of such clash of civilizations, which is sanctions on energy, financial instruments, will come to play, which they already are. Also, there are lesser known instruments of coercion in the financial area, such as the China threat to dump all the American bonds it holds, to artificially reduce the value of its currency to destabilize Asia and to gain an unfair competitive advantage over American products, to coerce other nations to use yuan, its currency, in bilateral trade to reduce the share of American dollars, etc. Of course, Americans can play the same game. To me, these are zero-sum games, but remember, in the war, you're not looking for a win-win situation. Anything that causes more damage to your rival than to you is fair game. On the other hand of the ledger, we will see a huge boom in R&D as, led by United States and China, every nation will try to catch up to these new technologies. And in fact, if there are going to be sanctions or restrictions on technology transfer, it only stands to reason that countries like Turkey will have to produce their own domestic technology sources. And of course, capex will explode all across the world, not only because the clash of civilizations, but because of the three other reasons I mentioned. You need to move up to Industry 4.0, develop your own artificial intelligence algorithms and Internet of Objects. You always had to do that as a nation, but now that there is a threat of new pandemics in the future years and the added threat of China or United States levying sanctions on your head, it has become more urgent. When I look at the balance sheet, I see the world receiving more harm from this clash of civilizations than benefits. I honestly don't see a quick resolution to that. There was one case where one side in the great powers contest capitulated very quickly. This was the brief contest between Japan and the United States. It was only an economic contest. It wasn't really a clash of civilizations. But then again, Japan is a very small country compared to the United States. China is a massive power, nationally united, very evangelical, and very young. So they're not going to capitulate to the United States. But I also wouldn't underestimate United States. Remember, Russia with Sputnik was ahead of the United States in the space race, and then Americans landed on the moon first, unless it's a conspiracy. So, the odds are even as far as I'm concerned. The future is uncertain, but I wouldn't rule out the United States. And finally, if you look at the recent conflicts like, the First and Second World Wars, democracy has always won. And to me, this is a personal view, of course. The biggest advantage that the West has over China is that we're a democratic society, and democracy usually shines the best during times of war. When it comes to Turkey, maybe I'll do another video about that, but the only thing that I want to say at this point is that Turkey will have to take sides. Turkey has very astutely danced between Russia and the United States, but that game is over. As Mr. Erdogan said, you are either with us or with them. And I think he will hear the same words from President Biden. I have a hook before I leave. Before this book is very dear to me and to my mentors who co-wrote it. It's the book that you can find only on select book websites. Turkish Economy at Crossroads. If you have any interest in understanding how the Turkish economy works, how we got here, including political economy and Turkey's future, please order this. Now it comes at a 30% discount. And once again, Real Turkey channel and Atilla Yeşilara thanks to the audience and remains grateful for their excellent comments and promises to produce more videos in the near future. Stay healthy, stay well, get vaccinated as soon as possible. Goodbye.